It's certainly an honor and a privilege to welcome China Marks to AVA Gallery. I hope you enjoy her talk today. We're certainly anxious to hear what she has to say. More on that in a minute. But first, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that these remain very, very exciting times at AVA. September 1st marked the beginning of our fiscal year 2018, so we're already there. Next week, Monday the 11th, we launch our fall programming in this building. Next Thursday, September 14th, we host Mudroom, Scary Stories this time around. Next Saturday, a very, very exciting day. It's the rollout of our first workshop in the new Sculptural Studies building. That will be followed shortly thereafter by welding courses, jewelry making, woodworking, and ceramics. So a fun, fun fall. This is just the beginning. But without further ado, let me introduce Jennifer Lay, AVA's exhibition coordinator, who will tell us a little bit about China, and we'll let China give us her talk. Thank you so much. Jen.
Hi, everybody. So, China Marks earned a BFA in sculpture from the Kansas City Art Institute and an MFA in sculpture from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. She has received numerous grants and awards, including a Fulbright Hays Fellowship to Kathmandu, Nepal, 3 fellowships from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, a Pollock Krasner Foundation grant, and most recently, a 2017 fellowship through the New York Foundation for the Arts. Marks's work is shown in galleries and museums through the United States and Europe, including the Owen James Gallery in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, New York, the Hampton Gallery in Amherst, Mass., and the Center for Book Arts in New York City. She now lives and makes art in Long Island, New York. For her art, Marks layers a variety of fabrics and threads to create complex sewn narrative drawings. All sewn drawings on display were created on an industrial sewing machine, with some drawings beginning as printed reproductions of classical artworks. Marks states, "This medium has such richness that it will take the rest of my life to unpack its possibilities. It makes use of everything I have ever done or known. I find the process of making a sewn drawing deeply interesting. Though it is very hard work, with thousands of knots to be tied and interminable doing, undoing, and redoing until I get it right, I have given myself over to it, becoming in effect as much an instrument of the process as any of my machines." Please join me in welcoming China.
Thank you. Can I lower this? Thank you. Better. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for having me here. Particularly want to thank Margaret and Jennifer and everyone I talked to and emailed to while we were putting this together. One thing I need to say, I don't live in Long Island, I live in Long Island City, which is part of New York City. I think that my drawings really tell you everything you need to know about them, but I still need to say something, so I'm going to. First of all, just to start at the beginning, perhaps I should tell you why I am doing this work, why I happen to find myself. Oh, is it possible to get some water? Thank you. How I found myself working in such a strange way. I was a sculptor for many years, and I also always drew. I've drawn all my life. I have a brother who's 5 years older than I am, and his earliest memories of me are of me on the floor, and I was either drawing or reading. I was an early reader, but I drew even before that. Drawing was like breathing for me, but it never occurred to me that it had anything to do with art. It was just something I did. And actually, when I eventually became an artist, I became a sculptor. But I always drew. And at some point, thank you, in the early, I would say 1999, 2000, I became convinced that I'd been repeating myself for years. And once I knew that, it was intolerable. So I decided that I would put paper up on the wall and I would draw, and that my drawings would tell me what to do next, because there's always been a kind of porous barrier between me and my work. I get as much information from the work as I put into it. So I drew for 2 or 3 months, and on December 6th of 2000, my drawings told me that they had to be sewn, and it would not be enough to hand sew them. I had to buy a sewing machine and learn how to generate and control a sewn line. And I had no idea what that meant. So I called a collector of mine whose partner worked in the theater, and he gave me Paul's number. I called Paul. Paul said, "That sounds like free motion embroidery. Find a sewing machine where you can lower or remove the feeder dogs and give it a try." So I did. It took me, I got a little home portable after Christmas. It took me a couple of weeks to have any control at all. Within a year, that was not enough for me. It kept breaking threads and snarling because I was layering and sewing over sewing. And after about 2.5 years, I got an industrial zigzag sewing machine. And let me just back up to say, as a sculptor, I'd used machines, and I had a real facility for machines. And the key to using a machine is your intention has to go from where you are all the way to the tip of the machine. And it meant that for me, oddly enough, drawing with a machine was easier than drawing by hand. That when I finally had a machine that could sew anything I gave it, my intention went all the way to the tip of the needle. I'm in close-up glasses, my nose is 6 inches from the needle, and I'm making decisions on the fly. And it is the most exciting, most interesting thing. It is a kind of truth-telling. I cannot tell you the number of times when my hands in the machine make decisions I didn't know were in me. Also, I come up with these great ideas. I'm laying out pieces of fabric. I'm convinced that all I need to do is pin it down and then sew it down, and it'll be done. And as soon as I start sewing, it's the built-in shit detector. I see, why did I think that would work? So there's a tremendous amount of undoing and redoing. Also, I can only see as far as the first step. Then I look at it, and then I know what to do next. People ask me where my ideas come from. They come from the process. One other thing to say, close to the beginning, is that I call them drawings because I draw. Some people think of them as collages, but collage is really only the beginning. It's very hard to tell, especially from these, because they're already copies of, I start with something that's a copy of a painting. So I had these made before I came to show you. Hell has its charms, the second one in. This is what the back looks like. It's purely linear. This is what I do. This is my drawing, as you see it on the back. If I were really famous and rich and powerful, I would show both sides of my drawings at the same time. And if you really get close to this, you can see the places where I pulled things out. The process is so intense and somewhat violent that when I undo something, often there's a hole left, and I have to kind of patch it before. It's what I call collateral damage. Here's another one. It's, it's She Cast a Spell to Bind Him to Her, which originally was Vermeer's The Lace Maker. It's easier to see on that one how it, this is what I did. Then it looks much simpler, but trust me, it isn't. It's excruciating, but so interesting. The other thing I wanted to say is that my work is a work in progress as well. I've been doing this for 15 years, and all of the work you see here is within the last year. It's not everything, and that's the other thing I wanted to tell you. I make, at this point, several different kinds of things. I make several kinds of drawings, but I also make broadsides, and I make one-of-a-kind books. Do people know what broadsides are? Okay. When, you know, at one time there was no movable type, then movable type came to Europe. And at some point, people got kind of used to movable type. And so newspapers were printed with the movable type. And I think of this as mainly English, but it may be because I can read English. But in by the 17th century, you know, they were publishing newspapers and all of that. And a newspaper would be printed and then folded and then sold. But that wasn't enough, because every once in a while there'd be something really horrendous that would happen. A coach would run away, someone would be murdered in a compromising position, and they needed to capitalize on that. News, it was hot news. So they would quickly do a single sheet where they would tell just what happened, and if they had an old woodcut that fit, like with a horse and coach, or a woman going like, oh, they would put that on, and they wouldn't fold the sheet. They'd use the full broad sheet. They'd print off 100 of them, sell them for a penny apiece, and make a killing that day. And that was the first broadside. Well, we don't, you know, we're not making our newspapers out of movable type anymore, but letterpress, which is what that was called, came back into fashion in the 20th century as a craft and art thing. And poets took hold of broadsides, and they realized that a single sheet printed in letterpress, sometimes with an image or not, was really a beautiful thing. So that's what broadsides are used. They're primarily text, and they're single sheet. Well, in my biography, my little bio that Jennifer read, it mentions that I got a Pollock-Krasner grant in 2013. That allowed me to get a computerized embroidery machine and software so that I could sew out, I could embroider out text that was legible. Before that, I'd have been appropriating text for 2 or 3 years. When I did that, suddenly, I could, as it were, speak without impediment. And I found I had so much to say, it didn't all fit on my drawings. So I started doing broadsides as well. But I wanted to keep it simple, so there are no broadsides in this. But if you go on my website, which is chinamarks.net, all one, Chinamarks all run together, .net, you can see my broadsides. I also do books, one-of-a-kind books. So I do broadsides, I do books, and I do drawings. Now the drawings can be subdivided, and there are 3 kinds of drawings in this show. One of them is just what I'd call a one-off drawing. I start somewhere, I end somewhere else, and it's a drawing. Then there are the short subjects. I call them short subjects because they're very complete in themselves, but they're miniaturized. I found out that the computerized embroidery machine could be persuaded to reproduce line drawings in thread. So I used some of my own drawings, things I found on the street, Chinese coloring books, anything that had a line drawing that I found interesting. I would convert it into a VP3. Hi, Pamela and Larry. I would convert it into a VP3 file, and I would embroider it out. The software is getting better at this, but often the drawings were somewhat approximate. And then I would do so I'd have this approximation on white or off-white fabric in black thread of this line drawing, and then I would collage into it, then I would sew into it, and then it would tell me what it needed to say. I would write the text out, I would add the text. And those are short subjects, and there are 2 of them. No, actually there aren't any in here. They're all on the other side. Okay. And then in 2014, I was visiting my brother and sister-in-law in Miami, and my brother takes me to downtown Miami where there's a discount fabric store. I buy fabric wherever I am. I also will take fabric from anybody who wants to give it to me. I have friends who give me their dead relatives fabric, jackets, blouses, scarves. I never say no. I don't always use everything, but I found sometimes I keep things on hand for 2 or 3 years before I find a use for it, and then I do. Oh yes, I heard about those floors. Why was I talking about fabric? Oh, I was in Miami, and I buy fabric wherever I am. And in this store, they had a tapestry showing the Madonna with the child Jesus, the boy Jesus, and the boy John the Baptist. It was such a strange thing. It was pretty clumsy, but it was kind of interesting, so I took it. I bought it and took it home. It turned out to be a very bad contemporary copy of a Raphael Madonna and Child, but I changed it. If you buy the catalog for my museum show, it's in the catalog. It's my first tapestry-based piece. To make a long story short, I was so intrigued by what happened, I ended up with something that was just as religious, infinitely stranger. There was something about taking something that already existed, The Renaissance stuff is particularly compelling because it's, there are certain conventions in the Renaissance, certain conventions of perspective, and there are religious conventions. You take those, you use them, and you subvert them. It was really interesting. As crude as the reproduction is, first of all, they're photographing it digitally, and then it's being woven on a digital loom, and it's, they have only a certain number of colors, and they might not be the colors that and they're worried because the blue is a little threadbare in the sky, so why don't we make it gold leaf instead? It's a little bare on this hill, why don't we put in some plants? So what I'm getting is a profound approximation of the original, but there's something there in some of them. There's something there. So I found a site online that sells these tapestries. They've since become fans of my work, and I get great buys from them. They give me 20% off, and if they occasionally get something that has a ding on the nose, they send it to me at 40% off, because they know no one will notice the nose by the time I'm finished. So that has become, I call them altered paintings, but they have been so profoundly and massively interfered with. They are really like the rest of art history. They are profoundly deranged and selective. So I turn them into something else. So that's the Vermeer lace maker. That was a Da Vinci woman with ermine. This is one of the Botero dancers. This was sort of a strange one. This was originally a 19th century phrenology chart. This was Guido Reni's St. Michael trampling Satan. This was another Rubens. This is John, I can't think of his middle name, Winterhouse, and this was Presenting the Rosebuds, and this is the same guy, Gather Ye Rosebuds where ye may, and that one is the Arnolfini portrait by Van Eyck. And my only challenge is to find ones that I think have some potential. I'm working on something now. Be patient with me about this. What I'm most interested in is not what I've done, but what's going to happen next. And I've been taking chances lately because I feel I have nothing to lose. And risk-taking is really addictive. I was working on big ones first, but I did so many small drawings on my own that I think my motor skills got better, or I could draw finer distinctions. And so I started getting smaller tapestries. And when they come, they're mush. You can't tell where one figure ends and the other figure begins. So the first thing you're doing is just sorting things out and then sort of kissing them back to life. So all these little ones are the newest, some of the newest, not all the newest, but some of the newest. Because after all, this is all within a year. But I ordered a Cézanne still life. Basket, still life, the basket on table. And there's something about those, and it's a really coarse copy, but there's something about those forms being piled up that is so dynamic. I'm coming up with, I think, the most painterly, most abstracted thing I've ever done, and I'm just really in the grip of it. but I was really glad to get away from it for a couple of days because it's giving me no peace. So what else can I tell you? I write everything. The text starts to come as I work on the drawing. As the drawing changes, the text changes. This doesn't happen as often as it used to, but sometimes I sew out the text too soon, and I end up having to change it. Happens sometimes still. This is important, I draw to make sense of the world. The world is profoundly puzzling to me, and I do what I can to make it clear to myself. I hope it has meaning for other people as well. Is there anything I should say that I haven't? I asked the people who know me. Yes? Yeah. Why did that happen?
No, I was thinking about the process. As you're making these drawings, do you think what's happening inside your head has different how people text and language?
Probably. Maybe I should say something about how I came to put text in and then what happened. In 2009, I was walking my dog after a rainstorm, and I found a dead umbrella on the street. And it was big, and it was all black fabric with printed text all over it. And I like to say that chance is my friend. I didn't know I would run into it, but I did. And so I took it home, I took it off its twisted skeleton, I threw the skeleton away, I dried it out, I folded it up and I put it away. About 3 weeks later, it occurred to me that I had old silk screens in a shelf in my basement from posters, and they had writing on them. And if I silk screen them in white ink on black fabric, I would have a store of words and letters that I could use the way I used pieces of fabric with images. So I did that, and I made 2 books that were both black on white, using a combination of the umbrella fabric and these silk-screened poster writings that I had. And then the next year, now my first books had been just wordless, just narrative. By the next year I realized that there was all kinds of writing on the fabric I had that I'd never noticed, what they call display type. And I realized I could also invent my own letters. You take a branch and you take a tree trunk, and you can make letters out of them. So by the next year, I was doing that. It was a lot of trouble, but I was doing it. And then I found that there were places I could find quilted fabric that had sentimental and religious text on them, and celebrations of the joys of sewing, all that kind of stuff. And I could excerpt those and use those. And so it was a gradual process. By the fall of 2010, these appropriated letters had come into my drawings. And then in 2013, it was a tsunami of words that came out. As you can tell, I really talk a lot. And I just think that as I became more efficient at this work, there was room for the words. I don't know what else it was. There's so many of them now. The last book that I did with appropriated text before I got my machine had over 350 words, all appropriated, and mostly not in words, often in letters. And they were small. And when you try to sew those things down, you destroy them. Because they're so small. And they don't want to stay in lines. It took me 4 months to do that book, and 2 months were just on the letters. It's just a blessing that I got that Pollock-Krasner grant. But I think I have a lot to say, and not all of it is in imagery. Yes?
Does your work with words and letters relate at all to calligraphy, the traditions of calligraphy?
I don't think so. In fact, I mean, one of the nice things about the computerized embroidery machine is that it comes with a number of typefaces that you can select. You always have the option of importing your own type, if you don't have the right one. Having 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 is enough for me. I'm not that focused on kind of the exquisiteness of writing. In fact, I still occasionally use appropriated text, or sometimes I have text that I embroidered and didn't use because the drawing changed. I keep it, cut it out, put it into things. My work is a form of speculative play. What happens if? What happens if? And it's also, I think, my friends who know me, I'm always telling them stories. Well, I'm always telling stories. Okay? I'm available if anybody wants to.